Thanks for choosing to listen to this Late Night Linux Family podcast. We're only able to do this because of the people who support us. None of our shows are paywalled, but our Patreon supporters can get most episodes early and never hear any ads. Learn more at latenightlinux.com/support or support us by telling a friend or colleague about everything we do.
Hybrid Cloud Show, Episode 58. I'm Aaron.
I'm Gary.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Shane.
Welcome to the show about public cloud, private cloud, and everything in between. Our views here are ours and not those of our employers. Gary, I understand you've just moved and you have therefore had a bit of a reassessment of your home lab and how you would redo it all. Is that fair?
Well, more accurately, I have taken what I had at the old house and, as close as possible, dumped it into the new house and continued the way that I was working. But what I got to realizing was that a new house is physically quite different from an old house in most cases. And also there are a bunch of decisions I made in terms of things like naming conventions or assumptions about the way that traffic would flow in the network that are maybe not so relevant at my new house. So I thought it might be worth having a little bit of a discussion about, you move house, what do you do? Do you start again from scratch? Do you do what I did and just dump your old network and old home lab in your new house? Or do you take it as a chance to reevaluate what you've got? And if so, what are the sorts of things that you would like to reevaluate were you to have a chance to start again from scratch?
I probably wouldn't buy a 24U rack and try to set up my own little mini data center. I know that's shocking compared to what I've said before, but sometimes you don't just need a free 48 PoE Cisco switch that is a bitch to manage.
Well, yeah, I mean, power use is one thing, right? And yeah, you're clearly one end of the scale, whereas I'm quite the other end of the scale. So for me, moving the servers as a lift and shift, aside from a couple of hardware failures that happened just before I moved, wasn't so bad because it is still a 24U rack, but it's mostly just stuff on shelves aside from a switches and a NAS. So that wasn't a huge issue. In fact, it was great because I just took the drives out of the NAS, rolled the whole thing onto the moving truck and rolled it back off at the other end.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think with my server rack, which is effectively just like a server box in my living room, it's just literally a power cable that comes out of it and an Ethernet cable that comes out of it. And I just plug that into the internet. So it's a mess inside of it. It's obviously crappy old laptops and some Dell Wise boxes and a HP something or other. But it's its own unit. It's its own Kubernetes cluster physical unit. I think I would not use the stress of moving and the expense of moving to be the time where I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? It's time to redo the home lab. Let's get the checkbook out, blow a load of cash and some slick new hardware. But that is just me. I'm lazy.
I'm imagining a box, like a cardboard box on the floor with holes in it with like the words "do not feed" on it and like just two cables coming out of it. Is that what it looks like?
Pretty much that. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just imagining the box from the IT crowd with the little flashing red light on the box. Yeah, this is the internet.
I scared my kids. I just said, if you touch this, your TV is gone. So it's all good. It's all right. The cardboard box is safe.
So I think sometimes there are physical constraints that make a difference in a different place. I remember I had a move where I was looking at my rather large, fractal node case or something that fits 10 hard drives or something. You know, it's a nice box if you've got the space for it, but moving it somewhere else where I didn't have that space was the trigger for me to look at my ZFS pools and say, well, actually, maybe I'm better to move to just 2 hard drives mirrored that are big rather than a set of 3x2 or whatever I had before. So I think there are sometimes like that where you're like, well, I need a different form factor, so I need to kind of look at everything that I'm doing. And then I think when I'm doing that, I do normally go back to how do I want to set this thing up and think a little bit more from that perspective.
Yeah, so for me, one of the biggest physical constraints in the new house is the topology of the network itself. So the old house, I had put the time and effort into run cable and the places where things were changed over time, but actually the cable that I ran, I could make do. There were a couple of extra hops through switches and things that I perhaps wouldn't have done if I'd designed it today, but it was workable. Whereas this house, we bought it late enough in its build that paying a man to run cable wasn't really an option, so I have to work that out now. But also, my garage is detached from the house and is diagonally opposite where the fiber comes into the house. So there's those kinds of things that I now have to navigate, where it's, well, I've got to run conduit up the side of the house to get Ethernet into the loft from where the fiber comes in. I've then got to put some kind of comms cab in the house, because clearly running all of the ports that I want to put in the house from the garage isn't going to work. And then I've got to work out things like, well, how do I then get network connectivity over to the detached garage, which is 5 or so meters away from the house, physically detached? Do I do copper? Do I do fiber? Do I do both? And those are just things that I've never had to think about before, because the houses that I've been in have been small enough to be able to just sling a cable down a wall and not worry too much about it.
That sounds like a very familiar story, Gary, because for my house, the internet only comes into one place, and that is in the master bedroom. Don't ask me why. I have no idea, but it means that my switch that I have, my UDM Pro, is in the rack, and I'm not going to put my rack in the master closet. My wife already said no. I asked. So the question is, what do I do? And I ended up finding an old phone line that just happened to be like Cat 5e. And I was like, good enough. And I swapped the keystones. And then I had to run the modem here to the closet to then come back into my switch here in the office.
Yeah. So in my house, it is new enough that they didn't bother to run analog phone lines, because you can't get a copper phone line to your house in the UK anymore. That's just not a thing. They did run a single length of coax from the living room and just left it coiled up in the loft. So I'd briefly considered Mocha as an option. I'd also considered using the coax as a pull wire to tape a piece of Cat6 to and pull that in the loft. That doesn't work, because they have, in some places, plastered directly over the coax cable. So my only option really to get cable from where the fiber comes in and where the ONT is into the loft is basically just to run external conduit. And I think I've accepted now that that is my fate, is to basically drill through the breeze block of the house and run an external conduit. And I can do it in such a way that it's neat, and I can run it down the back of the drain pipe, so it's effectively invisible, assuming I get black conduit. But the garage is the really painful thing, because my wife, much like yours, Sean, not only isn't going to allow a server closet or a server cabinet in our living room, she's not going to allow it in the house. If I want to do that, that's got to go in my space where I tinker with computers and cars and stuff. And that's the garage, which is 5 meters away in a separate building.
I'm pouring some out for you right now.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do I do? Do I try and run some kind of wireless link over there? That doesn't seem particularly reliable. Do I continue doing what I've done for now, which is Ethernet power line adapters? Those have been so far fairly stable, but they're not the 2.5 gig out to my servers that I used to have. Do I get a really long OM4 patch cable and pull it through the conduit that my armored power cable out to the garage is going into? Or do I just say, screw it, I'm just going to run Cat6 across and hope for the best? I mean, what would you guys do in that situation?
Before we answer that, why did you disqualify Mocha?
Because that only solves one part of my problem, which would be getting a connection from my ONT into the place where my switches and router are, which is upstairs.
Gotcha.
I don't really want to rely on Mocha as the primary means of getting internet connectivity into the house when I could just pull a cable.
So is the hard part getting it out to the garage?
Yeah, the other stuff I've, like I say, kind of accepted that I can drill through a wall with a long masonry bit and run some conduit. So the garage is the difficult bit, right? So it's, how do I extend my network into a completely detached building? So there is a piece of conduit that runs from my house to the garage that takes the armored power cable to the garage. it probably is feasible to run another external conduit down the diagonally opposite side of my house to where the fiber comes in, and then have a cable of some description poking out of the bottom of that and going into a conduit. But that doesn't feel like the cleanest solution, but it's probably what I've got to work with.
Considering your constraints, I think is probably the logical choice.
Yes, I've never had to do it for my personal house. I've run a lot of Cat 6 and Cat 5 in personal houses, so that's what I'm more familiar with. Where I previously worked, we ran a lot of cabling, and we were using proper Juniper kit, so there we would always use fiber rather than Cat 5 if it made sense, which it nearly always did, right? So, but none of my home equipment has ever had SFPs or whatever to connect optical into the switches, so I've always just been using Cat 6 cables.
Yeah, see, the switch both in the house and in the garage are Unify Pro Max 16s, so I could put a 10 gig fiber transceiver for multimode fiber in at both sides, but I'm not going to be terminating fiber. Like, I would just be buying like a 30-meter patch cable and hoping that I don't break it, is the honest answer.
Still, I'd probably be more comfortable running a little fiber cable. I suppose, yeah, you're more likely to break it, but it's smaller and everything if you can get the fiber down there, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what I'm leaning towards at the moment is probably running fiber plus a piece of Cat 6. And then if the fiber ever does go wrong, or I decide to change switches, or I've got a problem with the transceiver, at least I've got a copper backup going across there. I mean, it's nowhere near 100 meters, so I should be able to do gigabit over Cat 6 fine, in theory.
That is, as they say, a big brain move. That's very future-proof. I like that a lot.
I mean, I've learnt from the past of going, one cable is fine, and then just wishing 6 months later I'd pulled 2 or 3 while I was there, and not being able to back out of that decision. And the old house was a primary use case for this, where I had ended up doing all sorts of funky stuff with switches and untagged VLAN ports and things in the living room to get around to running my LTE failover back to my router that was in the living room, because I wanted the LTE modem in the loft where it actually got signal. So I don't want to do that again. That would have been way easier if I just thought about it ahead of time and hadn't just gone, yeah, I need one connection from the living room to my office. That's fine.
Yes, I think the answer is that you always need one more cable than however many you ran.
Yeah, I think that is a wise piece of advice, Aaron.
I also had a situation where we had the internet coming into just the living room or whatever. Similarly, I wanted that to go up into the loft and then come back down effectively to the TV, and that was annoying because I only had one cable that went from the living room up to the loft, and so then you get into weird situations of, what do you put at each end?
Yeah, I mean, my current answer to this is basically using the meshing feature of Unify APs. So when I first moved in, before I'd bought a cheap power line kit out to the garage, I had 4 APs, one in the living room, one upstairs, one in my kitchen, which then acted as another hop over to an AP in the garage, just going to my service. And that just wasn't sustainable. I mean, I was lucky if I was getting 10 megabits of my gigabit in on the service that was sitting in the garage.
Wow.
So right now I've got that down to a pair of U6 LRs. One is facing upwards in the living room, pointing towards upstairs. And then the upstairs one is facing in the correct orientation, pointing down roughly in the direction of the downstairs one. And I'm able to get about 150-ish megabits over that link. But given that I've got a gig down, 200 up coming into the house, I'm not particularly satisfied with that. I mean, the only device in the house that is currently getting full line speed is the Apple TV in the living room, which is not useful.
This is me levels of jank here, Gary. You're not in a good place.
I know, and this is why I wanted to come and ask for what you guys would do. But it sounds like maybe the plan I've got formulated in my head is perhaps the only sensible-ish option at this point. Or just sell the house and buy another one and get Cat 6 run. I mean, that's also an option.
whatever you do, make sure you spend the most money you can now. That way, because your wife will let you do it now. But if you come in a month and be like, I want to spend $1,000, she's gonna be like, no. So go for broke.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever regretted spending money on running cabling.
No, I mean, it's infrastructure, right? And I'm never going to make that money back with the house, but at least the cabling is there and in theory is there forever and I never have to touch it. Particularly if I get ahead and run something like Cat 6a now, which is going to be fine for years for anything I'm going to want to do over copper.
One day I'm going to walk into a house that I'm buying and I am going to see network jacks on the walls and a nice patch panel in a cupboard, and I'm going to thank some person who has previously wired up that house. It hasn't happened yet, but one day it's going to happen to me.
I thought that was my house. I saw them. I was like, yes, this is it. I didn't realize where the termination points were. And then half of the ports on the upstairs are attached to a 100 megabit switch. And I didn't realize that until after the fact. So now I have to go replace that switch too.
So Shane, I understand that you've been having some issues with your Git hoster. Do you want to give us some details?
Sure. I don't think I'll be the only person in the world to complain about GitHub in recent months. We use GitHub at my company, and we have been running into a lot of issues in the last while, to the point now where I am tracking when we are, as a company, blocked in doing things because GitHub is down. So we're starting to make a tally of like when things break, how they're breaking, the impact of that breakage, and when do we make a decision to move off if it continues on this trend.
You sound like Mitchell Hashimoto. Apparently, this guy is the co-founder, I think, of HashiCorp. And I read an article, it was on Hacker News. It was exactly what you just said, Shane. It was he was leaving GitHub to find another hoster because there was so much downtime just due to GitHub infra issues that it was literally causing issues.
Yeah, we're at that point. And we have a role in my team called Interrupt. And it's where it's someone who gets interrupted to do things like fix CI/CD. And I have, because it's so bad, as the manager, I was like, I'll shield the rest of the team. I will do interrupt duties like just indefinitely for the next while.
You're a fool, Harry.
And so I know, it's been really fun. So I'm really feeling the pain. But like in the last 2 months, I think we've had 12 outages. And that's not outages where GitHub was down and we weren't affected. I mean 12 times where GitHub has been down and blocked us doing a thing. And for many hours.
And what sorts of things are you talking about being blocked on?
A lot of it's GitHub Actions being down, but it's not just that. It's sometimes actions are up and the APIs are down. And the problem is that when that happens, it's hard to tell when it's GitHub that's broken, whether it's something third party that might be broken. QUAY.io was down yesterday. We assumed it was GitHub because GitHub's so flaky. Sometimes it'll appear as like a release please workflow has failed because it can't get the next tag because the GitHub API is down. And so you spend a lot of time trying to debug and figure out what's broken here. So you're wasting a lot of time, not just in outages, but in like diagnosing something that turns out to be at the bottom of a big bunch of calls, GitHub again.
Yeah, and presumably this isn't on their status page, and because it's such a wide variety of things, doing something like moving to self-hosted runners for your actions wouldn't really buy you any time.
We already moved to something called sprinters.sh. It's awesome, by the way. I highly recommend that product. The guy who runs it's really cool. I've reached out to him for support and he like responds instantly. So not a sponsored ad. Highly recommend that tool. But basically they will run your GitHub Actions on AWS is what we use. And so it'll provision the machines and run the workflow on that. So we don't even do tremendous amounts of like actual compute on GitHub. We chose Sprinters because it was cheaper, but even then we're not super dependent on GitHub Actions to host the long-running action jobs that we need.
Fine. Okay, so this is more just general instability across the platform than anything specific to actions, you think?
We had one particularly scary issue was that there was a merge queue regression in GitHub on the 23rd of May. And what that meant was that squash and rebase merges may have hit a queue in the wrong order. And so basically you couldn't trust the merges you were doing were in the predictable way in which Git is meant to operate. So that was not just like, oh, it's an outage. This was like version control may have broken our source because the ordering in which it's executed merges is out of sync, which was really bad. That was the thing that might have been the first one incident where I was like, okay, we may have to take this seriously as a problematic vendor.
Yeah, I mean, failing to operate source control reliably is quite the red flag, isn't it?
It's pretty fundamental to this one. Like, okay, outages we can kind of manage. And I mean, I put in a lot of retry logic around the APIs now when we call GitHub because I just can't rely on them as much as we used to. But yeah, this one was like, I need to depend on the protocol functioning as expected.
It's not just you. Zig has left, famously, the Hashimoto guy as well. Like, this is getting a lot of traction. And I have not seen anything from blogs to releases to security updates. So I haven't seen anything from their side to address or even signal that they are addressing their API instability. So if that's really caused you downtime, then yeah, move away yesterday. Where are you going to go?
That's the question. I'm not sure. And there is certainly some interesting options out there. I mean, maybe it's a question for you, Sean. You might have done a bit more reading up on this, but those people you've mentioned who have moved, what have they moved to?
GitLab, mostly. Some have done private, like Git servers or 4JO. Some moved to Codeberg. But I mean, there's no right answer. There's not like, we're all going from Facebook to Instagram. It's nothing like that. There's the, what is it called? What's the phrase? The lesser of two evils? It's that kind of thing, except you have like 5.
So Shane, you were talking about using some third party to do your GitHub runnery stuff. Is that going to make it easier if you do move to someone else?
I don't think so. This product does a great job of just like add a one-line config or something very similar, or maybe use this particular GitHub action and then we'll offload all the compute. So we haven't had to do much to engineering to be, agnostic of GitHub actions to use this sprinters.sh tool. So unfortunately, it's an awesome product. And as a result, we're more coupled to GitHub actions, basically.
Man, I'm going to feel so bad for this guy that owns Sprinter.sh because you are going on and on about how awesome it is. But the reality is if that's the only platform they service and you're about to leave away, then ooh.
I don't actually know if they offer other platforms, to be honest. Maybe. Yeah, but I've been looking at other CI tools. It's going to be difficult. The thing I'm worried about, and you've alluded to in your question, Aaron, is like Git is fine as a protocol. We can move that yesterday. The actions are the killer, and it's its own specific like YAML implementation for how to run these things. And there's Dependabot integrations, which basically automatically bounce your dependencies, and there's all the configuration for that. And we're using GitHub Actions, so obviously you're pulling from basically GitHub hosted containers that are doing the running. So there's a lot of like stuff coupled to GitHub annoyingly and the GitHub ecosystem. Have you folks ever done a change like this, or at least thought about how do I make myself a bit more vendor agnostic in CI/CD? Something effectively that I could chip away at over time.
Didn't we just talk about this a couple of weeks ago about writing your CI as like bash scripts so they're portable between different environments and running local?
Yeah, we could do that. Problem is that I guess it's not very integrated into the ecosystem around it.
You're right. And it never will be, right? That's the trade-off you're making from portability. You might get a lot of benefit out of, and I hate to say this, but just point some agent at it and be like, hey, translate all of my GitHub stuff to GitLab or to 4JO or whatever CI you end up going. And that might be at least a start. But if we're talking real platform engineering here, then you have to start from basics. It's starting with making templates of basic things that your other developers can consume as, modules to then build up what they need. And that's just going to take a lot of time and dedication.
Fair. Yeah. I guess if you've got your own vendor agnostic template and you could just compile that out to whatever the hell tool later on.
Sure.
Yeah, that's not a bad shout, actually. Right now, it's GitHub action config files in a pile of repos. Maybe that's the first step. Get rid of that.
Yeah, and maybe decoupling the build steps that you've got for a standard build into a bunch of bash scripts that you're then just choosing an orchestration platform for is a reasonable first step, right? Say, pulling code, all that stuff is pretty standard, but if you know exactly what compiler you're using and what compiler flags you've got to run a build, then where the artifact gets pushed through and what variables you need to pass in and out in order to go and push the build artifact up somewhere, like breaking apart your pipeline into something that's a bit more agnostic and then using something else to execute it might be a reasonable first step.
That's a good shout. We do use a lot of shell scripts in Actions. It's more a case of like the setup for the infrastructure to run the shell. We probably offload a lot to, like, as I say, GitHub Actions. So if we could turn that into effectively scripts for our own managed Docker containers effectively, we probably would do a lot of the heavy lifting before we actually commit to any other CI/CD provider.
Yeah, make sure you can break away from Actions in a clean way first before you commit to locking yourself into another ecosystem.
And you can do that using like a build pack pattern where you put these scripts into a container and the whole job of that container is just to be an OCI transport. So that way, if you pull it in GitLab or in Circled CI or you pull it on GitHub Actions, the same scripts are there. They run the same way.
That's a good shout, actually. I hadn't thought of build packs to solve this.
It also sounds like some of your issues are a mix of infrastructure outages or service outages. And so maybe it's helpful if you are moving to a provider where there are options to self-host the same sort of infrastructure that they're running as a hosted service.
The optionality will be nice, where obviously with GitHub, it's not an option. Even there's tools out there like Act that are supposed to allow you to like run GitHub Actions locally. So you could like iterate and develop them locally, but they're pretty poor alternatives, to be honest. I've tried my best to get them working, but it'd be quite nice to have another provider, CI/CD provider, where I could run and test workflows locally without having to push things up. It's a really annoying limitation with GitHub.
It blows my mind that it's more expensive and more cumbersome to bring your own runners to GitHub to run than just using their free ones.
Yep.
Well, that's probably a good place to stop. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and if you've got any questions or comments in the meantime, please send those in to show@hybridcloudshow.com. I've been Aaron.
I've been Gary.
I've been Sean.
And I've been Shane.
See you later.